Hello friends, welcome to another exciting video. My name is Manasseh and I'm a US RN, and it's always a pleasure to come your way. And let me start by saying a big thank you for watching this video. And today, permit me to start on a rather interesting note. On this piece of interesting writing, I came across one on Reddit and the other on Quora. So this is the first one, and this is what it says. Only heard good things about nursing in Australia. One of my ex-colleagues, who is Australian, was shocked at UK nurses' work overload, staffing levels, and how poorly nursing is viewed as a profession. She said they have turned teams who go around the wards turning bariatric patients, and they get paid extra for the damage it does to your back. I'm sure they have minimum staff-patient ratios as well, and the pay was much better. Nursing in the US sounds bad, if not worse than the UK. And for those of you who don't know, if you've ever worked in a ward that has high dependency levels, like in a stroke unit where I used to work in the UK, turns is such a big deal, which is why the person is talking about turns and turn teams in Australia, which go around the hospitals and turn patients so that they prevent bed sores from occurring. So that's the first one, okay, for UK. Now, let's go to the second thing I saw. So this one is from someone who seems to have worked in the US and Australia and wrote this. So he says, I worked most of my years in the US, but also worked in Australia for a while. In all honesty, Australia would be my preference. Some states have had nurse to patient ratios in place by law since 2000. There are a lot of opportunities in Australia. The pay and benefits are good, and it's by no means easier, but Australia has strong national nursing unions who have fought to get this pay and benefits. Then there is the immigration process. Neither country makes it easy. I presently live and work in New Zealand, and there is a Trans-Tasman agreement that makes it relatively easy to become registered in Australia if New Zealand has granted registration and practicing certificate. Of course, above all, you have to complete all the immigration requirements for either country before you can move to the country to work there. Now, let me burst your bubble, guys. The US might not be the most attractive country for nurses in the year 2024. I know that US nurses, especially the travel nurses, are one of the loudest groups of nurses in the US when it comes to flaunting their opulent lifestyle, the cars they drive, the mansions they live in, and all of that. But what they don't tell you is the mountain of bills that they have to surmount. I know that when they talk about earning $250,000 and $300,000 a year, which is what some of them get paid as travel nurses, it gets tempting, in all honesty. I mean, anybody who is working to make ends meet would want to have those amounts of money paid to their account. But there's a catch. I mean, there's so much bills that some of them don't talk about these things. And so when you consider some of these things, in addition to some other concerns that nurses have raised both in the US and the UK, you realize that the US, which seems to be the country that pays nurses the highest in the world, might not be the most attractive countries for nurses. And there is another country on the block, which is what I'm going to talk about today. So please stay tuned, and let me go ahead by saying thank you to all of you who keep watching these videos. You make it so much easier for me to go out, search for content, and make videos for you guys. So keep watching, and remember to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment down below on what is being discussed here, because this is a hot topic among nurses, and I know that there are sharp opinions over which country is the most appropriate country for nurses. So please let the discussion go on in the comment section while I continue serving you with what I have today in this video. Now, the truth is, if you participate in any of the nursing forums, be it Facebook, Reddit, Twitter, and Quora, and all of those other forums, you realize that a lot of talk has come up in defense of nursing in Australia, with people citing the very wonderful lifestyle they live in Australia, reduced work to patient ratios, which is one of the biggest challenges for nurses in the US and the UK. I mean, back in the UK, I used to have 8 to 9 patients on a day shift, and I have 12 to 13 patients on a night shift, which is normal. I mean, we talk about it and we complain about it, agency nurses talk about it, but it is what has become the norm, and that's what you have to put up with on a regular basis if you're a nurse in the UK. And it's quite different to what happens in the US, okay? I mean, in the US, you have lesser patient ratios. Currently, I work in a hospital that gives you about 4 to 5 patients on a day shift, and then 5 to 6 patients on a night shift, which is much better. But there are some hospitals in some parts of the US which have patient ratios of constant 5, 6, and 7 patients in some cases. So this makes nursing in UK and US a bit stressful, and it seems to be one of the biggest bargaining points of nurses in Australia. Now, but the first question we all have to ask ourselves is, what has made Australia such an attractive destination for nurses in such a brief period of time? Now, if you take a look at Australia's population over the past 50 years, their population has more than doubled. This 100% increase in the population of Australia over the past 50 years nurses does not necessarily translate into 100% increase in the number of nurses who were in Australia 50 years ago and the number of nurses who are in Australia currently. Because within the 50-year period, you will admit that some new industries have emerged and have taken a chunk of the people who are going to fill up positions for nursing and midwifery into these new industries which have come up. One of them is tech, and if you are into the tech space, you know that Australia is one of the global giants when it comes to tech jobs. They have a lot of juicy jobs which attract talent from all over the world. So it does make sense that the chunk of people who would have filled traditional health jobs like nursing and medicine have other options, and most of them will prefer this tech job because one, they pay higher, and also they have reduced workloads. I mean, nursing is one of the most difficult jobs, most tasking and stressful jobs you can ever do. So some of these countries have developed new industries, okay, with tech being one of them, and they have taken a chunk of the nurses and midwives away. People are beginning to live longer in Australia, so people are aging more, people are living longer, but the number of carers is reducing. So it's a simple issue of supply versus demand. So you have a lot of people living longer and nurses number reducing. Now, so this mismatch in population growth as against the decline in the number of nurses is what is leading to such huge demand for nurses in Australia. So this is simply what has caused all this demand in Australia, which has made Australia a good destination for nurses all around the world. Now, so the other question is, what is attracting people to Australia? Because it's not enough to just talk about the demand. I mean, there's demand in other countries, but people are not necessarily going there. So why are they moving to Australia in their droves? And that is the question that we have to answer. Now, the number one thing I believe, and that has been on the lips of many people who have migrated from countries like the UK and the US to Australia, is the weather in Australia. Now, guys, if you know anything about Australia, apart from the wildlife attraction of the country, the sunshine all year round is strong, and it is one of the leading things that people find attractive about going to Australia for. Now, if you didn't know, one of the countries which has the leading number of nurses migrating to Australia to work is the UK. A lot of British nurses are migrating to Australia to work, so much so that the Royal College of Nursing, which is like the leading nursing bodies in the UK, has had cause to write a whole article and publish a whole article about nurses leaving the UK for Australia. Like the Australian High Commissioner to the UK has said that they are proudly recruiting a lot of British nurses to Australia because they are offering them better conditions of service. And it is easy to talk about the pay and all of that, but if you know anything about the UK has this very unpredictable, unfriendly and harsh weather. Now, it does appear that the sunny weather all year round in Australia might just be the biggest catch for British nurses migrating to Australia. And I know there will be some considerations about the salary levels and the cost of living and income differences and all of that. But considering that the difference may not be so much, I think that the weather is the biggest catch, because generally British people love to move to Australia as tourists and all of that, which is why you have nearly 1 million British people settled down and living in Australia. And it's because the weather is such an attractive part of the country, and British people generally love the weather. They love their summers, and during the summer you see a lot of British people basking in the sun, chit-chatting with their friends, taking sun baths, and everybody seems just happy in the UK during the summer periods. But when it's winter, everybody becomes cold and gloomy, and the winter is the period that occupies sometimes a very long period of the year in the country. So when they get a chance to migrate to a country which offers a similar standard of living, which is a former British colony, and they have some semblance of British culture, they have a good language system and overall good lifestyle after all, British people will find it very attractive to migrate to that country. And so it's no surprise at all that a lot of British doctors find solace in working in Australia. Same as British nurses, most of them are migrating in their droves to Australia. And it's not just the British nurses. Currently, a lot of American nurses are also talking about migrating to Australia, or nurses from Philippines, Africa, especially because they watch in the news about issues of gun violence and all other things in the US, which in some instances may bloated out of proportion. But some people have those safety concerns for their families, and so for starters, they will not consider any other country apart from Australia or the UK. And with the way pay issues are happening in the UK, most of them are considering Australia. So for things like safety, good pay and all of that, people are beginning to consider Australia a lot. Now, the other thing is that in the UK, you can go days to weeks or months without a single ray of sunshine, which is not good for your health, because research has shown that people with darker skin are at risk of a lot of mental issues, depression and all of that, especially when you don't have sunlight, because you need the sunlight to synthesize vitamin D, which is literally absent for a large time in the UK. So most people, or especially blacks, who are becoming increasingly aware of the health dangers associated with the lack of sunshine, are beginning to find more interest and solace in migrating migrating to a country like Australia, which has a good standard of living as well. Now, the other reason why Australia has become the most attractive destination for nurses in the year 2024 is because of the great pay that they have. Now, so I watched this video of a YouTuber called Nanelle, who interviewed a fellow YouTuber called Nurse Dio, who had migrated from the UK to Australia, and she was talking about the salary and her earnings, and it's a very interesting comparison she was doing. So UK nurses earn about £28,000 a year, which translates to about 53,000 Australian dollars. Now, nurses in Australia earn $87,750,000 on average. Now, this is nearly a double of what nurses are earning in UK if you add other incentives, like incentives that they give to nurses for having a master's degree and the shift differentials that people earn in Australia. Now, guys, look at the margin of difference. This is very similar to the amount of money nurses earn in the US in some states, and in some states nurses earn about $60,000 to $70,000 a year, which is much lower than what nurses are being paid in Australia. The other advantage is that cost of living in Australia is much lower than cost of living in the US. For instance, if your employer doesn't give you health insurance in the US, you need to pay for health insurance, and you end up paying about $700 to $800 a month for a family of 2 people living in the US with an employer who doesn't give health insurance, and they have to pay for their own health insurance. And it's common. Most internationally educated nurses who migrate to the US have to have deductions made from their paycheck for health insurance, and it is a big burden. It can take a large chunk of your pay away, especially if you have a family of more than 1 or 2 people. Now, this is not the case in Australia. Healthcare is free in Australia, just like in the UK. So if you're earning $87,000, the amount of money that comes to you after tax is a lot, because you don't have health insurance to be deducted out of your paycheck. So once you don't have health insurance being deducted out of your paycheck, if you're a nurse in Australia, that is more savings for you. Now, guys, at this point, I'll ask you to go ahead and like the video, leave a comment. Now, what do you think of what I'm talking about? What are your opinions? If you have any opinion, just let me know in the comment section. I know most of you watching have more experience and understanding of the Australian, American, British system and the dichotomies involved more than me, so please go ahead and let me know what you think in the comment section. Now, the other attraction for nurses who want to work in Australia is a better work schedule. You see, in Australia, majority of nurses work 8 hours, and if you go back to that video that Nanelle interviewed Nurse Dio, she did speak about the fact that they have to work for just 8 hours, with 9 shifts usually being about 12 hours, but the majority of nurses in Australia work 8-hour shifts, and this is much better than the 12 hours that we have to do in the US or in the UK, and the 13-hour shift that you do at night in this country. So if you work in the US, you have to, or in the UK, you go for your night shift at 7 and then you finish at 8 in the morning. That's a clear 13-hour shift. And it's the same for day shifts, just that you do 12 hours during the day. So in the day, you go at 7 and you finish at 7:30. So it's like 12 and a half hours. But in Australia, it is 8 hours. And I know some nurses in the US and the UK say that they like the 12 hours in that it affords them more time for off days. So the argument is that if they do 3 days in a week, they have covered the 36 hours and then they have 4 days off. But truth be told, sometimes you get so exhausted that you are not even able to enjoy those off days. You spend 1 or 2 days just resting and sleeping, and then you have 2 days left. Whereas if you do an 8-hour shift, you are able to have the rest of the day off. Let's say if you go from 7 and close at 3, you have from 3 to the following day at 7 to do a lot of things you have to do. And because you are not particularly exhausted due to the long hours of work, you are able to maximize the opportunity and the energy you have left to do other things. But sometimes when you go to work in the US or in the UK and you get home, the only thing you want to do is sleep. You just want to get into your bed because you are so exhausted, and it becomes worse when you have a back-to-back shift like 2 or 3 days in a row. It is just unbelievably stressful. Now, that is why you realize that people who want to work or who work in clinics in the US and the UK seems to have an advantage, and those jobs working in clinics in the US and the UK seem to be a more attractive option for most nurses in the UK and the US. Those roles are far more competitive because people like those jobs. Okay, that is the simple truth. So this strategy or this shift pattern, which appears to be an attractive one or a privileged position in countries like the UK and the US, is the norm in Australia. So who wouldn't want to go there and enjoy equal pay just like you're working in the US or higher than working in the UK, and still have the benefits of working in a clinic and do like a 7 to 3 p.m. shift and have the rest of the day for yourself? Okay guys, so the question now is, will you be going to Australia? Having heard all these benefits, the free healthcare, the attractive shift patterns, and the huge amount of pay that they are giving nurses with the added incentives, like incentives for even having a master's degrees and all of those ones. The question is, are you heading to Australia. Now, if you're interested in going to Australia, then prepare to take the NCLEX, the OSCE that's taken in the UK. You need to take a similar exams to practice in Australia, and then you need to take the IELTS test or the OET, whichever English language testing system is acceptable. You need to prepare to take all these tests to be able to practice in Australia. Now, so it's going to seem like a huge mountain to climb ahead of you, but like I said in times past, the level of your interest will determine the level of motivation and intensity with which you attack all these goals ahead of you. Now, but before you go, be sure to check out this video where I talk about why I left the UK for the US. And don't be asking me why I did not move to Australia with all these benefits. I know some of you have plans of going there, but please don't ask me why I didn't go to Australia. And thanks for watching this video. I'll catch you in the next one. Remember to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share widely with your friends. And I'm going to catch you in the next one. See you.